In the last video, we talked about arrays, which are perfect for creating lists of items. And in this video, we're going to talk about objects, which are probably the most important variable type in JavaScript because they allow you to do so much. And an object is just a collection of information all related together in some way. So let's just create some variables like we normally would. So we're going to say name, we're going to set that equal to a string here. We'll say Kyle. And let's just create another variable. We'll make this one a const, why not? And we'll say age equal to 25. And then let's say maybe we want to create something else such as a favorite number. So we'll say favorite number is equal to 3. So this is information about a person that we have created here. We have a name, we have an age, we have a favorite number. But right now it's all 3 separate variables. They're not really related to each other in any way. So in order to relate this information together and say, we want to create a person, and this person has a name, it has an age, and it has a favorite number. So to do that, we're going to use an object. So we can come down here, let's create a variable called person. Let's just make this a let person. And to create an object, we need to use curly braces. So curly braces, just like we would for a function, we create curly braces, and now we have an object. This person object is an empty object. Essentially, it's an object with nothing inside of it. It's the same as if you created 2 square brackets. This would be an empty array with nothing in it. Now we have an empty object that has no values in it. And if we just come down here, console.log person, you can see over here we just have an empty object with nothing inside of it. So how do we add things inside of an object? Well, all you need to do is you need to put a key and a value. So the key is like what the name of this thing is. So you have properties. A person has a name, they have an age, they have a favorite number. Those are your keys. So we can say a key of name, and the name is Kyle, if I spell my own name correctly. And now when we log out person down here, you can see it has the property name with the value Kyle, the key name and the value Kyle. So you can see we have a key value pair. Let's go a step further and add an age. So we can say the key is age, put a colon here, and then we're going to put the value 25. And you want to put a space here, it just makes it easier to read everything. And we put commas between each one of our properties. Just like with an array, you put a comma between each element. Inside of an object, you put a comma between each property. Now we save this, and we have a person with an age, and they have a name. And let's go one step further and put in here our favorite number. And that favorite number is 3. Let's just get rid of this stuff up here. Save this, and now you can see we have a person with an age, a favorite number, and a name. And all of this information is available on the person object. And generally, when you create objects, you're going to see objects written out with each property on its own line. Whoops, just like this. It just makes it easier to work with and to see all of the different properties if they're on their own individual lines like this. And again, you can add a comma to the end if you want, and it'll still run. But with Prettier, the way we have it set up, it's going to remove that comma for us. But just like arrays, you can add an extra comma at the end if you want. It doesn't make any difference. As you can see, we still have age, favorite number, and name. So now we can put all of the information of our person out there. We can list the entire person, everything that there is about this person. But how do we access just one part of the person? Let's say we just want the name. All we would do is put a period, this dot symbol, and then we can type in whatever property we want. As you can see, it lists out age, favorite number, and name, and knows we have those 3 properties. So we can just type in name. Now when we click save, we print out just the name portion of the person. So what this dot syntax allows us to do is it says, okay, we have this whole person object, everything inside of here. And the dot says we want to get a single property from here. So either the name, the age, or the favorite number. In our case, we typed in name. So it's going to give us the value of this name property here. So we have the key name and the value Kyle, and person dot name just says go into the person object, get the name property, and give us the value of that. We can do the same thing with age, and now we're going to get 25. Or we could even go so far as to say favorite number, and we're going to get 3 printed out here. So we can access any property inside of this person object. And now something interesting you might notice is console is actually an object, because you can see we have console period log. So now we have a function or an object console, which has a function log on it. It has the property log. And if we just say down here console.log of console, we just want to log out this console object, and we click save, you can see our console is an object that has tons of information inside of it. It has all these different functions, but as you can see, it's got this opening brace and this closing curly brace. So we know that this is actually an object. So it's kind of interesting to think about. We've been using console log this whole time, and really all console log is an object that has a function called log inside of it. So how do we add a function to an object? It's the same way we would add any other variable, because in JavaScript, functions are just variables. All we need to do down here is just put a comma, and we're going to create a function called sayHi. And all we need to do is put the colon here. So this is the property. And now we have a function. So we can say function, and then we don't actually need to give this function a name. It can be an anonymous function because it's declared by this sayHi here. So we can say function, and then inside of this function, as I said, it's anonymous, so it has no name here. That's okay. Then we could just say console.log hi. And now I can come down here and I can say person.sayHi, and I can run this as a function. And now if I run, you can see it says hi. And I just need to get rid of this extra log here. There we go. So now we have person that's saying hi. Another way that we can define the sayHi function is to just come in here and write a function like we normally would, but without the function keyword. So we can just say hi, which is the name of our function. And then we put in our parentheses for our parameters. And then inside of here, we could put console.log hi. These both are exactly the same. We'll call this one sayHi2 because you need to have different names for all of your properties in an object, just like you would with variables, because essentially these are variables. This sayHi2 is exactly the same as sayHi1. And if we come in here and say hi2, run that as a function and save, you'll see it prints out hi. And generally, people are going to go with this second approach when they're creating functions inside of objects. And the way that these functions work is it's just like creating a normal function, but you don't have the function keyword. Just get rid of the function keyword, and now it's just like any other normal function. So that's really the only important thing to note when you're creating functions inside of an object is to leave off the function keyword and then write it as normal. Just make sure, again, you have the comma after each one of your properties, and this function right here is a property, so you need a comma after it in order to create a new property, which we'll just call property and value. So now we need this comma to be here because this will work. But if we get rid of this comma and save, we're going to get an error because we need that comma between each one of our individual properties. And it's a very common error people run into. So now I want you to create your very own object. What I want you to do is create an object called car. And I want this object to have different properties. So with the properties, number 1 is going to be make. Number 2 is going to be model. And let's put in here number 3. We're just going to call this condition. So this would be like good, bad, used, new, whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. So we have make, we have model, and actually let's just change this from condition to is used. So this is going to be true if it's a used car and false if it is a new car. So I want you to create this object, and then also I want you to add the function or add a function called make noise, which logs out vroom, just like that. So we're going to have an object which has a make, a model, an is used property, and then finally a function called make noise, which logs out the text vroom. So I'm going to give you a second, pause the video here and try to create this. And it's okay if you get stuck. I'm going to show you how to do it in just a little bit. So hopefully you've had a little bit of time to try this out. And all we need to do is first create a variable. So let car. And we're going to set it equal to these curly braces. And like I said, I generally like to put each property on its own line. It makes it easier to write out. So we have the properties make, we have the property model, the property is used, and we're also going to have a function called make noise. So this is kind of the skeleton of what our object is going to look like. So let's specify a make for our car. We'll just come in here, we'll say Nissan, and for our model, we'll do the 370Z. And then is used, we're going to say true because this is a used car. And instead of doing the string true like this, I want to use a Boolean true because we want this to be an actual Boolean value where we can check true versus false. And make sure you put your commas at the end of each one of these lines. That's incredibly important. Otherwise, we're going to get tons of errors. And then in our function make noise, we just want to console.log out vroom. So now let's check to see if this works. We'll say car.make noise. And you can see it puts out the text vroom. Let's just do a console.log of our car.make, and we get Nissan. Our model is 370Z, and is used is returning true. So now that we have this example up here, I want to show you kind of an interesting thing that you can do with objects to access different properties. You know that we can use this dot notation where we put the dot and then the name of the property, but you can also use brackets to specify the name of a property. And inside the brackets, you pass a string with the name, in our case, make. So we can pass in here brackets and then a string of the property we want and then close off those brackets. kind of like if you were accessing an array element. This is the same thing, but we put the actual name of the index here. So in this case, make is our property name. And if we save, we get Nissan being printed out. I recommend never to do this though, because it's so much more difficult to read as opposed to .make, and you're also going to have issues where your text editor may not know exactly what's going on, and .make is much more clear than using the bracket notation. The only time you would ever want to use the bracket notation is if you had a variable. So we'll call this variable here property, and we're going to set that equal to make. And if you had a variable called property, which is make, and you wanted to access that property on an object, you can't just say, car.property, because this is trying to get the property, named property, inside of car and not actually using this variable. So you would need to use the bracket notation here and pass in property like this. That would get us the correct text. This is something that doesn't really come up very often though, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. Just use the dot notation and just say in here .make, and that's going to give you the best results. Now, just like with arrays, we can put objects inside of other objects. So let's come in here with our person object, and we're going to say that our person has a name, which is Kyle. And let's say that inside of here, we're going to have a object called address. And inside we'll have, like a street, which is just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, main street. And let's put a city called somewhere. And there we go. So we have an address with a street and a city. So we have a property called address, which is itself just an object. So this property name is a string and this property address is an object. And this address object has a street, which is a property that has a string, and a city, which is a string as well. So just like with arrays, we can put objects inside of other objects. We can even put an array inside this object. So we could say hobbies, for example, and this would just be an array of strings. So we can say, for example, weight lifting, and let's put in here programming. So this is a list of different hobbies, and just put the comma at the end. And now we have a name, a list of hobbies, essentially an array, and then we have an address here, which is an object. And we can just say console.log person.name, prints out our name. We can print out our hobbies, which is going to print out that array for us. And we can even access elements on that array. For example, the first hobby would be weightlifting. And we can print out here our address, just like this. And you can see it has city and it has street. And just like with arrays, we can chain these together. So let's say we want to get the street property of our address. We would just say person.address.street, because address is an object. So you access it just like any other object. And now we save, we get the street. Or we could get here the city of the address. And now it's going to print out the city. And this may seem confusing. It may think, oh, when do I use one dot? When do I use two dots? Really, all you need to think about is what is this thing I'm accessing? So person is an object. So we use the period to access properties of that object. Address is also an object. So we know that we want to access properties of that object. We use the dot followed by the name of that property. When we had an array here, for example, hobbies, we know hobbies is an array. And in order to access elements in an array, you use a bracket. For example, bracket 0, we get our first element in that array. So you just need to think, what is my thing that I'm working on at this exact point? Person is an object, so we use the dot notation. Here we have hobbies, which is an array, so we use the brackets to get an element inside of it. So I want to give you a challenge to do something similar to this. I want you to create an object called a book with the following properties. And so for our first property, we're going to have title. This is just the name of the book. It's a string, so we'll say string here. And then for our second one, we're going to have author. And this is going to be an object. And this author is going to have its own properties. So we'll say 2.a. This is going to be inside the author object. Actually, I'll just put it up here. So object with the properties, name and age. And make sure I spelled properties correctly. Whoops. Properties, there we go. And that's all I want. So I want you to create an object called book, and it's going to have a title, which is a string, and then an author, which is an object with the properties name and age. So pause the video here, take some time to do this, and then come back when you're done. So hopefully you've given yourself a chance to create this. So let's create our variable. We'll say let book equal, and use the curly braces, go on to the next line. Title is the name of our first property, and we're just going to give this a string here. We're just going to say whatever you want. We'll say the way of shadows, save that. And then what we can do is go down to our author section, which we know is going to be an object. So we want to use curly braces again to say this is an object. And we're going to have a name of this person, which is going to be Brent Weeks. And then we need to put the age as well. I don't actually know what his real age is. We'll just say 34. And now we have our book. So let's console.log our book. And if we come over here, you can see we have our author, which has age and name. And then we have our title, which is the way of shadows down here. And we can obviously print out all of these individual. For example, title, we could print out name and, I'm sorry, not name, author, author.name and author.age. Something interesting you'll notice though, if I try to access a property on book that doesn't exist, for example, this clearly does not exist in our book, and I save, we get undefined. So anytime you try to access a property on an object that does not exist, you just get undefined being returned because you haven't defined that property on this object yet. It doesn't throw any weird errors, it just returns undefined, which is really nice. Now, let's say that we want to modify our book. Let's say we want to change our book title. So we can say book.title equals new title. All you need to do is access that element, in our case book.title, and then we just need to set it equal to whatever we want the new title to be. And now if we console.log book.title, our new title is being shown here. We can do the same thing by changing our author.name. We can change it to new name. And now if we access that new author name by saying book.author.name, you can see it's updated their name. And if we access that whole author object, you can see it's modified that actual object itself, or it's reset our name to this new name here. It's just like with arrays. If we had an array, for example, let hobbies equal, I'll just put 1 and 2, and I said hobbies of 0 is equal to 3. I'm changing the first element to the value 3, and now if I print out hobbies, you can see I'm getting 3, 2 printed. So it works just the same way as it would with arrays. You're just redefining the specific value to be what you want it to be. I kind of like to think of arrays and objects as like a collection of linked together variables. So an array is a list of variables, while an object is a collection of variables where you have a name and you have a value. So you can clearly say that all of these different variables, title, author, name, and age, are directly linked to this single book. They're all in the same object, so they're all somehow related to one another. And that's really all there is to understand about objects. They're really just a collection of variables and functions that all work together for the same thing. And everything in JavaScript is going to be built on all of these different types that I've talked about. From things like numbers and strings and booleans all the way to arrays and objects, everything you see in JavaScript is essentially going to be built out of at least one of these. In most cases, things are going to be objects. You see objects everywhere in JavaScript, so having a strong understanding of them is incredibly important, and we're going to be using them all across this course on various different projects and exercises. In the next video, I'm going to be talking about a concept that's unique to objects and arrays, which is the idea of reference versus value. So I can't wait to see you in that video.